So I have some questions about Eve. I mean, in particular, in Genesis chapter 2, when Adam has been created, God says, let's make a helper for Eve. And that little word helper has been used to create, at times, an enormous gap in the amount of authority and scope of influence granted to women. No, she can't do that. She's supposed to be a helper. So help me understand then, what does that word mean?
Right. I think in English we think of a helper as the subordinate. You know, there's the one in charge and then that person's helper. It's a really interesting word in the Hebrew because it's this word azer, and it's used in about 20 times in the Old Testament. 15 out of the 20 it refers to God.
Wow.
And so
God's our helper.
God is our helper. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My azer, my help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth.
That's revolutionary.
There's a feminist Old Testament scholar, and she says, maybe our problem with helper isn't the one we think it is. Maybe it's actually this sort of more hierarchical. She says that tongue in cheek, but I think her point is to say that the word helper doesn't mean you're lesser than. It means someone who can help you do something you can't do on your own.
Yeah.
So I think,
and if we take that view, then it really completely changes the way that we view the kind of hierarchical structure.
Exactly.
And it creates at the least more egalitarian. And at times, I think it's very important for either gender to realize we complete each other in various ways, and this is liberating rather than constraining.
Exactly.
Yeah. My other question then is in Genesis 3. So there's been the fall, and Adam and Eve have partaken of the fruit, and then when God is meting out judgment on Satan and different situations, one of the things that God says has to do with the relationship between the man and the woman, and He says to the woman, "He shall rule over you." I'm wondering what that means, because that has also been used as a basis for a power structure that is at times very destructive.
Yeah, and that one's, the Hebrew and the context is a little bit less easy than the helper question, because ruling over does imply hierarchy much more than the language of helper does. A couple of other follow-up responses to that, though. One is the idea of rule, as we see the Israelites get their king later on in the book of Samuel. The ruler isn't supposed to dominate and subjugate. The best rulers are the ones who help the people that they're ruling, who support them. And
does this kind of have to do with servant leadership that Jesus talks about later, in a sense?
I think so, yeah. That, again, the ideal ruler, the ideal king is always the one who takes care of those who are vulnerable.
So that they can flourish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that might be one way of getting at it. Another way of thinking about the ruling over is this meant to be something for all times, period, no matter what, that men are always supposed to rule over women? I think not, for a couple of reasons. One might be just some of our practical responses as humans to the other aspects of the consequences of the fall. For example, Eve is told she's always going to have pain in childbearing.
Right.
And so we have today, though, drugs to help women through anesthesia, to help women through childbearing.
Right.
Adam's told that he's going to toil the earth all these days, but we have technologies.
Yeah.
We've got plows and tractors and those things. So it strikes me that there's a lot of ways that we as humans try to overcome the other negative consequences.
Yep.
But for some reason, it seems like we've accepted this one more as we're just going to take this.
Almost not only accepted, but almost elevated it and said, yeah, this is the way it's supposed to be. And it has a kingdom component to it too, doesn't it? In the sense that, hey, if Christ is now risen and his kingdom has begun, my calling is never to embody the curse,
right,
but to seek to make visible some kind of an undoing of the curse.
Exactly. That if we take seriously the cross and the resurrection, and we say that we are no longer bound by sin, then we live into this life that doesn't operate under the consequences of sin from Genesis 3.
And then does that begin to bring kind of Galatians 3 into play,
yes,
where Paul says, hey, no longer these hierarchical structures,
exactly,
because of Christ.
Because we're united in Christ, we're all one. And yeah.
That's super helpful. Thanks.
Good.